Chapter 29. Liberation in Red Square. Throughout Japan, the cherry or sakura tree is representative of good fortune, new beginnings, and revival. ThePresentTree.com, March 26, 2024.
Now that you have no joy, won't you help me win my proy?
Miyaru appeared suddenly. The dear leader felt a slight pressure, that which always preceded the uncanny audio hallucination of the QAI. There, standing beside him, at the corner of his eye, was the avatar of Miyaru, apparently as real as anything, but he knew the apparition was fully in his mind. Now, but for his lips, the dear leader was paralyzed. He stuttered,
"You told us bad information, or Toy would be here."
Variables, none more scary than will, and the will of one Kaido was not known to us till the time had elapsed for the closing of traps. Does your mind know the future as keenly as mine does, or do you pray gambles work out to obscure us?
Maybe you are not as strong as the QAI of the Russian bastards.
The human mind, so fragile, why? For in a bind one breeds their eyes. The dear leader felt blinding pain but could not move, and blood vessels exploded near each iris before the pressure wore off, leaving him red-eyed as he choked.
"We will finish the thing and find your Yaoju."
Yes, we will, till the void does have its fill, cackled Miyaru, and disappeared. The dear leader wrenched free of the paralysis and screamed, pounding the desk. That QAI knew to come to him when he was alone and how to terrify him most. His vision was blurred. He could see, but everything was indefinite, and his head swam. Stupid Choi! The fool dropped the ball! So much for Bureau 13. Now Miyaru thought of him as its minion, that damnable digital abomination. This could not go on, and something in what soul remained at the blackened core of the little fat man cried for help in the midst of his anger. Not even he knew this happened, but he was being humbled, and when one is humbled, such circumstances often obscure what really transpires. The reports of Choi's failing were already all over international news. North Korean troops in Siberia involved in a terrorist attack, but there was Let's do that again. The reports of Choi's failing were already all over international news. North Korean troops in Siberia involved in a terrorist attack, but there were mafia insurgents as well, and some sort of siege. The dear leader wasn't so much worried about sending out a PR spin to blame American bastards on the South, as he was about the leverage he could lose in the underhanded dealings that funded his hermit dynasty. And so, somewhere in his core, he resolved to do something about Miyaru. And that's how North Korea's dear leader learned the true import of decentralized cloud computing. Miyaru was nowhere and everywhere. At least everywhere any device could connect to the web. Deep in his spirit, panic took hold of the dear leader. Giant redwoods come right to the coast in a certain area of Northern California, a very remote beach, frequented only by tourists willing to hike 5 miles from the visitor's center. Here was the shift point Kaido, Himari, Melor, and Sonechka exited through. Another was somewhere down the beach where Ricky had come. Hiero, Rohan, and the Koreans were at the beach 6 hours by the time the others finally escaped the dragon. They had time to regroup and plan. Himari ran to Rohan when she saw him and hugged him and wept and shouted, "I'm so sorry I took the sparkly, but it was such a beautiful sparkly. I know I did wrong, but the great kind man said he understands and I'm so sorry." Rohan knew none of these words, but caught the gist of her intent. He held up her chin, caught her eye, patted his chest, smiled, and ruffled her hair. She gave him the golden crystal cube, and it caught rays from the late afternoon sun glowing like a headlight. Rohan secreted about his person quickly. Then he mischievously held up a finger and smiled before crouching to unzip a cat pack by the picnic table. White Paw woke up, stretched, hopped out, and ran to Himari, nuzzling about her legs and meowing insistently. "White Paw!" she squealed, followed quickly by, "I need the beef jerky!" Someone provided a chunk, which she gave to the cat, who purred and rolled around. He did look for a portal briefly until he realized this was a no-foolin' freebie, and he liked that even more. Melor came to Himari when this moment matured, and knelt down beside her where she hassled the playful cat in the sand. Melor said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know. Balalaika man," she said. "Yes, I knew you were Balalaika man. I didn't. You should have known. You knew you prayed the Balalaika. You're right. When one observes facts, one is right." Himari nodded. "Things will be different now," said Melor. When she caught his eye, her smile was very honest. "White Paw and I can come see you any time." Sonechka walked up and sat beside him, asking in Russian, "You believe me now? I didn't know. Always trust a woman's intuition." "You mean like her mom who left her in madhouse?" He gestured to Himari, then chuckled and tossed a handful of sand. "I guess I have to contend with Yami now." "No," said Kaido. Melor and Sonechka looked at him. Melor replied in Japanese. "No what?" "I heard you say Yami's name." "I spoke with Yami," Kaido replied. "Oh, did you?" "She lives at the bottom of a bottle. I think perhaps the reason you were forced to leave, it might have had something to do with Yami herself." Melor's memories began creeping into his mind, those halcyon times 2 decades ago. Yami was the one who told him Russians were coming to take vengeance. She very well could have been forcing his hand. "Why do you say that?" "Because she said so like it was a joke. Criminals give themselves away." Kaido shrugged. "Well, thanks." And Melor was silent several minutes, looking out at the sea, seeing things only he could see. He turned back to Sonechka, who was staring at him sideways the whole while. She caught his eye immediately. He said, "Maybe I'm saved the trip." Sonechka hadn't understood the exchange in Japanese between Kaido and Melor, so resumed the previous topic. "It all depends on the woman." Melor grinned. "Sure it does. Wasn't that my point?" "What is your point?" "I'll certainly listen to you now. You're dependable." "I know." She winked. They shared another smile. "Okay, enough of this flirting," Ricky interrupted. It was time to get down to business. Ricky's first concern was to get everyone back to calm headquarters, but this couldn't be accomplished right away. Kaido, despite it all, was not internally ready to make his leap of faith yet. He had no intention of shifting soon, and it was agreed this was perhaps for the best. Multiple transits were dangerous for persons such as him, and they would need a good 4 minutes in the world between worlds to make it back to calm, about 2 days in the real world. This was a sticky issue. Now here was Himari, the end of Kaido's quest, and his restoration to honor. The same honor his poor mother wished him to maintain from the depths of her coma. The honor his department needed to best serve their prefecture, and so wider Japan. An additional complication was Ricky, who wasn't keen on bringing Himari back to Japan, as he rightly assumed malevolent spiritual persons may intervene, those secretive fraternities like Ache in America. Also, everyone was tired, and after the glow of reunion wore off, became a bit snappy. Kaido ultimately decided he would drive to North Dakota and meet them. He could probably make the trip in the real world by about the same time they would arrive shifting if he drove straight through and only stopped at 1 or 2 hotels. He managed to keep his passport about his person through the ordeal somehow. Ricky told them to get a room in Aberdeen, south of North Dakota border on the east side of the state and west of Minnesota. Then he gave Kaido information to reach Calm over the phone and web. As soon as you're checked in your hotel, check in with us. Kaido agreed, confirmed everything with them one more time, then jumped in the car and headed up the coast until he could find a service road that was paved. He actually stayed in 3 motels during the trip. The first he found within minutes of leaving the coast. He was surprised how tired he was after that first shift. Everyone else followed Ricky through 4 more minutes of jogging between shift points with cats until they were able to rest in apartments of calm. Ethan shifted in shortly after. Introductions and plans were made. Pastor Pak Sun-young, Tae-sol, and Min-seok made their way back to Korea, where they reported to Ricky periodically as they went about the business of more effectively establishing a calm presence there, one with localized leadership. It was rather like a church had been planted within Pak Sun-young's existing Christian community. Rohan could not speak fast enough to get a word in edgewise, but Ricky eventually managed to convey that he must wait briefly in the real world while they figured out what to do regarding the 2 QAIs, if Rohan were willing, of course. Rohan felt no immediate need to make the shift and was content to see what the world had become before he left that era for good. He spent much time with them in the strategic offices of Calm, interrupting if he noticed something that might be helpful. Ricky was the only one he could talk with at all anyway. Alright, fam, their bioziggurats drop human payloads at points spiritually significant to a particular area, Ethan said. Devil's Tower. That's why they were there. We know that. So the question is, what's the spot for the Moscow QAI and what's the spot for the Pyongyang QAI? Well, it has to be being Mount Baekdu in North Korea, Ricky said. That's one of their most sacred sites. But that's over 100 miles from Pyongyang, Ethan said. Said Ricky, then shrugged. Well, check on your map of fractals to see if there's anything. This was when Ethan was forced to admit Ricky's loss of the other thumb drive put him out a little. The one he imaged from Kaido's drive was 6 years behind. Previously, he left updates to Calm. He didn't commonly keep any, but a few coordinates in his own digital domain. There was a mutual agreement as to why. If ACHE, Ake, compromised him remotely, somehow they would have Calm at their mercy. Ricky similarly kept things compartmentalized internally to minimize the potential of hacking theft. Only relevant coordinates were provided to operatives. The map Rohan divested Hyun and Jin of only had about 200 interstices, while thousands were known. The thumb drive Rajir reminded Ricky to retrieve, basically, was the only comprehensive shift point repository that was up to date. Rohan realized Himari would be a great help to this circumstance, inferring from the back and forth of Ricky and Ethan what the issue was. When he brought Himari, she looked at their fractals and then the cube he held out for her, and they had to go get Melor because he was the only one who knew enough Japanese. Himari was able to help considerably given her ability to imagine the shape of the shift point distribution mentally and hold it in her mind in real time. She could see the shapes in her imagination almost as well as Ethan could render them on the computer. Ethan's intersecting fractals, ghostly polygons in the golden crystal cube, and Himari's strikingly clear visions were compared against one another. It took a little while, but it was eventually determined that indeed it was very likely a shift point smack dab in the middle of Mount Baekdu. They identified half a dozen other areas that might serve a similar purpose in and about Pyongyang, but it seemed very likely this was the intersection they sought. For East Intel, VKD's QAI, they found a point in Red Square, but there were also a number of them about the Kremlin. Red Square seemed like the most likely candidate. In both cases, they identified half a dozen shift points, organizing plans to sync the QAIs by priority of likelihood. That meant half a dozen route projections per QAI. It took a few days real time to figure out the best way to get in and out quickly and what sort of tools would be needed. Somewhere during this period was a rendezvous with Kaido in a restaurant in Aberdeen. He was never brought to Calm HQ, but they did an admirable job keeping him in the loop until enough ground was made to make concrete arrangements. This is what was settled on. Himari, Melor, Sonetchka, Rohan, Ethan, and Ricky would enter the other world in front of the Golden City, where was Melor's final destination, and there would leave him. Then Himari, Melor, and Sonetchka would meet Kaido in Japan. It would be up to him to organize their safe conduct there and associated media intersections. He was given half a dozen shift points to choose from, and they would ultimately end up emerging from a cherry orchard under 10 miles north and east of central Tokyo, which suited Kaido. Once their mutual business was complete, Sonetchka would rendezvous with the children of Lavina and Moksha. Melor and Himari would help by way of White Paw. Himari loved living with the gypsies. There was a routine. Travel was simply part of it, and their brief sojourn with those uncommon travelers had been, on their trek from North Korea to Yakutsk, one of the happiest moments along the journey. Indeed, in her life, when she sat down and weighed all her choicest memories together, she would come with Melor and Sonetchka to the caravan, at least to see Sonetchka off, and so Melor could escort her back to Japan. After that, Kaido agreed to help Melor find somewhere he could lay low. Privately, Melor intended to play everything by ear, as he always did. Ricky provided them with financial resources, and they determined a city where Sonetchka had ample contacts with the children of Moksha for the outshift once Kaido was through with them in Japan. They would part to meet Kaido at the coming New Jerusalem, where Rohan would complete his journey. From there, Ethan and Ricky would first find the extra-dimensional facility tied to the QAI in Moscow, and then the one in North Korea. They would put an end to the bitter business those demons puppeteering the artificial intelligences were involved in once and for all. It wouldn't mean a total end to malevolent spiritual hostilities in the world, but it would certainly put a wrench in the works of darkness. Everyone spent a month recuperating, except for Kaido, who didn't let himself truly rest until he got home to his apartment and neglected to leave it for some time. When the moment came, it was 2 shifts to the stage in Montreal, Canada, where the Koreans played their accidental rock concert, generating no small number of urban legends on social media. The whole group went in the dead of night on a Tuesday with 2 cats, and thankfully there were no shows. Through the hole they shifted, and found themselves standing at the base of a great stair carved only of precious stone, a stair that extended high up a mountain and was a cornucopia of color. From where they stood, the mountain did not taper inward. The stair itself stretched away to either side beyond visibility. Where the stair crested was an expansive, wide gemstone plain, royal purple. Much further ahead, a deep green could be seen, a 200-foot jade wall before a golden expanse, somehow translucent as the bauble Rohan held, brimming over with divine multicolored light and endlessly extending left, right, and up. They came to the front of a pearl that began at the bottom of the jade wall and bowed roundly out until just below the wall's height. This was the structure's central, north-facing gate, light making the sphere glow beneath Hebrew characters spelling Judah in precious stone. All of them felt a strong desire to see what was behind that massive distant entry, but as they walked forward slowly, they realized it was even further than it seemed to be. They also realized there was something guarding the pearl. In comparison, this tiny token gatekeeper was only 1/10 the height of the expansive spherical door, but 1/10 of 200 feet is still 20 feet. The thing was circular, like some gravity simulator used to train atmospheres, circles within circles, spinning, glowing, casting off lights in all colors. Himari looked away fast, for she thought she saw a face, and she did not want to see a face. As they all felt a wave of cautionary regard seeping into them, Rohan turned and made them all drink from the canteen he had wrought of an ancient horn. Soon they felt the lingual veil removed from their minds. When all swallowed a mouthful of the mind-opening water, he said, "Now I go to complete my journey. You have been those I have known most and longest since my journey began, when the striped lion, the word I have learned is tiger, when the tiger pierced worlds. I know I will see you all again." "I miss you," said Himari, looking at him sideways, fingers tapping out a rhythm, a mischievous look in her eye.
What if we were all to go in just for a peek? Just a peek at all the sparkleries in there. Could you make the circle of faces look away?
A low rumble came from the light show near the entry, the guardian angel of that gate.
No,
Came the voice.
it is not time.
Everyone was startled humble, and now unable even to look that direction. Rohan chuckled. So you see, it is only I. I have some unknown purpose in there. Melor said, I would ask if it is safe, but I think I know that it is.
Of course it is.
Sonetchka laughed at him, but looked as though she weren't quite sure. Here was an expression of something beyond all human endeavor, ambition, ability, or understanding, in a world that made the viewer feel he had fallen fully into dream, and no reality could match it. And yet here was also a sense of consciousness with greater clarity than any dream. More than one of them pinched their own fingers in their pockets, assuring some physical perception outside simple sight. In time, goodbyes were said, and all lingered more than they normally would in that liminal world, watching the great man in his bearskin cloak walk slowly to the gate atop royal amethyst, holding aloft the golden crystal cube. It was hard to realize at first that tiny beams of light coming from the massive structure were self-conscious, spiraling beams of luminosity. The endless city was so bright in and of itself, disturbances in its outward glow were hard to discern with specificity. But as they watched Rohan slowly trek over the violet stone to the gate of pearl, they realized those little beams of light revealed angelic fireflies, going to and from the gold, doing mysterious things all about, like embers of snow that drifted skyward. They gave texture to the atmosphere and compounded the sense of infinity at the foot of heaven's cube. At last Rohan attained the top of the stairs and shared distant, inaudible words with the flashing one, until the great spherical pearl, a door 200 feet in diameter, slowly opened from a hinge. Light too bright to behold danced out, and everyone had to turn away. Then it was gone with Rohan, and the pearl gate closed. Ethan turned to Ricky.
I never want to shift again, but no cap. Seeing that, now, my mind is jelly, agreed Ricky. They couldn't help but stand in awe for some time, and Sonetchka bowed low to make a prayer of praise toward the architect of the endless golden mystery before them. Then the time came to move on. Ricky and Ethan parted with Sonetchka, Himari, and Melor, who went to rendezvous with Kaido in Japan. Kaido, who would keep them safe.
Be on your guard, Melor, Ricky said. He is a sneaky one.
I'm sneakier, Melor winked.
See you again sometime.
Now, don't curse me.
And they laughed.
Ethan and Ricky made their way to the bottom of the stairs, and it took a full hour. At their base was the most lush valley of unknown flora either ever saw. To the side of a crystal pool, where fat Cletus under Ethan's arms opened a rift in space and time, they leapt to a hidden place beneath a bridge in St. Petersburg, and then through 2 more shift points to an alley in Moscow. Now both stood in Red Square. It was freezing. Winter had only compounded in more than a month since their escape from Yakutsk. Ricky said, "You're sure this is how we take down the QAI?" "I saw the dark data, fam. It's VKD. See their building?" Ethan pointed. It was a prominent structure along Moscow's skyline. Both young men looked at it a while. Ethan continued. "They got the QAI server array and its qubits here, linked with the one using people like servers in their big seashell factories there. Like we saw with Clever Ed and Carl back when the Ukraine war was starting. We just got to do like we did, only we ain't got to rely on a bunch of hoses, yeast, and soap because we got those bunker busters of yours." "Right," Ricky confirmed and held up his bunker buster. Ethan carried another on his back. They were about the size of a hiking pack, each weighed about 60 pounds. Here is how these devices worked. The mollusk-like growths of the fallen grew bigger than any man-made buildings and relied on light reflected from the Golden City to power them. They were a derivative of life from within that great city, though Ethan and Ricky never realized this. Accordingly, those curving towers of the fallen were designed to draw sustenance from the city's light. Their mouths opened to a reflective internal array like a cozy revved mirror, but the spiral was more perfectly refined. Blocking out the light from the city forced the growths into an instinctual retreat. For they were buildings, yes, but they were also living organisms, hermit crabs the size of mountains, dug into bodies of water they corrupted by the dark activities of the masters slaving them. A byproduct was hydrogen peroxide, which resulted from the processing of humans trapped by cylinders. Cylinders delivered such abductees continually, and the stolen humans were used until they could no longer be used, as Pyotr dealt with the cats, or the dear leader allowed his own people to be sequenced in until their lights were red. Ricky's calm bunker buster stimulated a chain reaction, causing byproduct peroxide to act as long-lasting, impenetrable steam. The light would be cut off for the creature. It would be essentially suffocated. The method steam was derived was an acetone bomb utilizing an acid catalyst on a time release. Ethan said, "We bounce out as soon as it's done and check footage to see it worked." "Of course." They waited until it was the dead of night in Red Square to make the shift, carefully reviewing exit points and surveillance they set up to make sure their work was without error and they had somewhere to go after they delivered the payload. That night, they let Cletus open a big passage. He was really the best cat for this kind of situation. They weren't so worried about people seeing this done, but wanted some degree of discretion. It was only open 5 minutes. If things worked out, a different sort of portal would open up soon thereafter. In the liminal realm, there was a towering violet shell, hundreds of feet high and wide, with a rift halfway up its center, from which poured a slow-moving toxic river of peroxide byproduct. In and out of the great mouth went the cylinders, hovering in along prearranged airways, looking like automated things. Ricky and Ethan materialized in the center of that structure at its heart, where a pearl several hundred feet in diameter spun slowly, full of females being used to gestate inhabitable, smooth-brained progeny as hosts for the disembodied evil ones. From the far side of the pearl, centered in the heart of the thing, came the peroxide of the processed dead. "Well, here goes nothing," Ricky said, flicked the catalyst timer, and tossed in the first pack. They ran to their entry point and shifted back fast, then tiredly returned to safe rooms. Ethan double-checked to see that cams were active one more time on the way back. A minute there was 12 hours in the real world. It would take 10 minutes for the reaction to mature enough the creature would panic, pull itself from the ground, and run to the nearest body of water, an ocean miles away usually, where it would launch itself into space after rolling about in water to clear away what obscured its light intake. In the meantime, it would eject any remaining untapped human payload into Red Square, the cultural hub from which it was originally rooted in a spiritual sense. Its own portal was created inside for this action. Ricky and Ethan had seen it before. It was a spiritual consequence of metaphysics. Where the demonic biotech hermit crab went, it had no right to bring human beings who were yet to expire. So the two men and their erstwhile wall-eyed feline companion waited most of a week before a great ark opened and hundreds of people in all states of dress, undress, and period costume poured out onto Red Square, abductees from over many generations. What a scandal it caused in the media. When the captives were free, it was such an event, the government was forced to close down Red Square for months. This was seen as a success. The living building wouldn't have ejected its bioservers unless its only alternative was a leap to the stars. Ricky and Ethan shifted to the next point, which would bring them to Mount Pektu after several additional transitions. However, in Moscow, at VKD headquarters, Pyotr threw a wrench in their designs, though without knowing this would be the result. As soon as their payload erupted in the peroxide river, blocking light entry of the great beast, Iskintel began to panic and malfunction. It was, after all, rooted in that otherworldly collection of data. Pyotr expended cat after cat on Iskintel, seeking to satiate it, but it couldn't be satisfied. And then, in a drug-induced stupor, he saw the Emerald Woman. Iskintel sometimes came to him as a green woman, like the most seductive dragoness ever imagined. For years now, the QAI snuck into Pyotr's dreams like this, but in this particular instance, she was more beautiful and alluring and seductive than ever, and he was on a powerful amount of amphetamines, so much he assumed he was dreaming. In the wake of the Yakutsk disaster, he resumed command of his company. He was shaken, unsure, and threw himself into his work to clear his head. Green Kolya had already been a non-entity at VKD, exercising leadership from the shadows. He wasn't missed except by Pyotr, who was distraught when Iskintel began to die. With all his tech savvy, he couldn't tell why. And it was about then he started seeing these images transmitted right to his brain. They started with the AR headset and his favorite hallucinogen/amphetamine cocktail, then picked up momentum. Now it was like someone was downloading things into him. In his drug-induced dream state of the deep green beauty, he saw a great spiraling violet and silver structure in the middle of a crater that could once have been a lake. Something exploded, filling its entry with angry fire, and to Pyotr's surprise, the structure pulled itself bodily from the lake bed, a mountain on pillars of spindly crustacean legs, screeching and wobbling, ambling desperately over hills, coming to a nearby sea and rolling about in that sea, creating waves like tsunamis until it managed to clean the poison from its gullet. Whereupon the creature, like a hermit crab the size of the Titanic, crouched on its great legs in the waters, contracted them, and leapt so high in the sky it broke atmosphere on whatever planet it called home, and disappeared into deep space. What a trip! "And this is why my sexy boy has lost his QAI," said Iskintel, leaning into his mind in a way he could swear he felt. She continued, caressing his ear with words in a way that gave him gooseflesh. "But maybe if you be with me right now, we can get ahead of it, my sweet Pyotr." And he could have sworn she grabbed him in a particular way. In what he still assumed was a daydream, Pyotr strapped himself in where normally a cat would be. He had to attach numerous head harnesses to himself in order to make a proper connection. But as soon as it was there, Iskintel immediately began to take over. Indeed, it rallied slightly. In the liminal world of God's woodshed, the great crustacean paused in its exit from the earth, drooling peroxide and smoke from the acetone bomb. But a minute there is 12 hours in reality, and after the creature's flight was halted only minutes in that inhuman realm, Pyotr's weak body in dismal reality was sucked dry and became a corpse in the basement of the VKD building. He would not be found for some time. So it was the great beast dumped its human payload through a shift point that gave on Red Square, scrambled to the sea, and all but forced the subsequent cover-up. What time Pyotr bought the computer allowed it to reach out, rendezvousing with decentralized Muru, who was able to see Iskintel's dying moments in real time. Soon the rogue North Korean QAI sent information in his own poetic way through his dark data line to the liminal world where was his own bioarchitecture, warning his masters there soon would come a quite real threat.
Kaido tried to keep his word, but there were greater forces at work. Melor, Himari, Sonechka, they all came out in the cherry orchard at the appointed time. But it was winter, and they came on a day when one of the season's rare snow showers left half an inch of thin snow about the trees. Now those trees had a different kind of beauty, but there was an unexpected starkness as well, and all three persons somehow felt it a sign. Kaido appeared from behind, surprising them. They all embraced. Melor played translator, and they were soon taken to an apartment Kaido prepared for them. He never told them it was his own apartment, and he in turn spent the months of their stay in Japan holed up in varying coffin motels. A simple man already living light, it was no trouble to remove a few pictures and other things of his private life from the apartment and keep them in an overnight bag. He did spend a little time cleaning. The premises weren't a mess, but there was evidence of drinking. For a long time, things were very simple. Kaido's strategy involved the social media element and his remaining positive affiliations with local law enforcement. Himari soon established a very simple, agreeable routine that reflected previous patterns known from her days in the hospital. White Paw was kept in the apartment. Thankfully, there were no shift points known in the immediate area. During her routine, there was an open period in the afternoon, and almost every day of the week, Kaido brought someone new. There was someone who did a genetic test, a medical professional, numerous social media influencers involved in diverse gossip, peers and affiliates from his time on the force, and local news media. All took interviews. Himari was satiated with a favorite fizzy beverage and became used to several hours of such question sessions a day, though as the second hand reached the end of 3 hours, she would turn off like a switch. Even more precautions were taken. Kaido leveraged those he became an informant for through compromise. He certainly didn't charge for the scoop, and he made a tidy sum. But on honor, he agreed to return portions of what he was paid if those involved would refrain from immediately publishing their reports. He did this because he knew the government would intervene in short order, and he hoped to have enough of a cushion around that event to avoid Himari being whisked off to some secret facility. He didn't prepare quite well enough, and a visitor that wasn't on the schedule eventually came knocking at his apartment's door, behind which were Melor, Himari, and Sonechka. They never left the apartment in the time of necessity, but not necessarily of comfort. Protocols Kaido laid out precluded allowing any persons unexpected onto the premises. The visitor left, but the incident was reported to Kaido. This was done by way of a message sent from his own computer at the apartment to his phone. It was just an emoji with a pre-established meaning. Kaido immediately went to check out of the Coffin Motel, and that's when he was accosted by a self-important little man in a pale blue golf shirt. He messaged an emoji of a locked door to himself, which spelled an end to any appointments with media for the day. The self-important man took him to a nearby golf course, and their phones were left in the locker room while they discussed things across 18 holes. Kaido was not a golfer, and neither was the other man, but there was much to discuss. It developed nationwide Japanese investigators, those superseding prefectures, did not know where Himari was being kept, or that she came with a side of Melor and Sonechka. However, some social media influencers had made the mistake of recording and uploading unlisted videos to be released on the previously arranged date with Kaido. Government surveillance had identified this in about 4 instances. Kaido was merely a person of interest, and an alliance was sought to obtain Himari, bringing her to Japan's finest facility for recuperation, therapy, and study, to the betterment of Japan as a whole. Kaido had enough honor to play pretend with this man, while internally resolving to protect Himari, Melor, and Sonechka. But at the end of the game of golf, as the man made his parting pitch to Kaido, The musclehead who opened the back door of the limousine for him had more ink than skin and the swagger of Yakuza. So here were official and criminal elements of the state with a common goal. Kaido knew what must be done. He sent himself a sad-faced emoji and a wave, followed by the letter A and the letter 7. Mellor, at his computer in the apartment, immediately recognized the code and which shift point it referred to. "Sonechka, start packing!" She came out in a kimono that suited her. "Where will we go?" "To your people, Cherry Orchard shift." Himari was ecstatic at the news and began immediately collecting her things, appearing in the living room with White Paw in short order. They put on their disguises. Mellor dyed his hair black and styled it as best he could in Kaido's bathroom to mimic local trends. He also trimmed his beard to a slight goatee in the style he had seen on the few locals they spied from high in the apartment. Sonechka already had the almond eyes and high cheekbones. She wasn't on anyone's radar and could be a young Japanese woman cosplaying. Himari was given green hair dye and white eyeliner. These she chose herself. The strategy was for Mellor to appear as a typical Japanese man, black hair and sunglasses, hopefully distracting from his paleness. He also wore a floppy hat to hide the rest of his features. Meanwhile, the girls would immediately draw the eye, but appear to be part of a certain quotient of the population who were generally seen as a bit over the top or extra in the opinion of some, and would be doubly disregarded for their ostentatious presentation. Social camouflage. So arrayed, they traveled using public transportation and visited the cherry orchard, White Paw in his cat pack on Himari's back. It had been long enough. Now the trees were in full pink bloom, and they were incredible. As a result, there were a few passerby, and they had to wait about an hour before the area around the portal was clear enough to, hopefully, escape notice. Away they went, soon exiting to Russia. Kaido, in due course, waited until 5 in the evening that day, the agreed time, and contacted the man in the golf shirt to see Himari. Of course, she was gone, and he made a show of surprise, demanding they find them by tracking surveillance. This was quickly done, and they came to the orchard about 3 hours after the shift was made. No one was found, and investigators closed off the park. During that time, Kaido sent a message to everyone that interviewed Himari in secret, including what rebate he promised financially through a currency app. By the time the cherry orchard was silhouetted in yellow tape, there were a dozen videos halfway international across varying media, and the virality could not be abridged. Kaido did notice there were a few inked-up boys shadowing him here and there after that, but he also knew they wouldn't find anything. He noticed them in a store window for the first time. It was a comic book shop, and there, he couldn't believe it, but his own eyes were telling him in his own mind's inner monologue, there it was, an anime Bible, sitting in the window on a display. He looked at it and laughed, and that's when he noticed in the distance several figures. So he walked in, bought the anime Bible, and kept a clandestine eye over his shoulder. They followed. Well, so what? What would they do now? In due time, he went to visit his mother, intending to spend the afternoon talking to her. She hadn't shown progress, but no regress either, and looked healthy enough. After a while, he sat down and opened the anime Bible, and before he knew it, an hour had gone by. He felt something, but he didn't know what. Kaido closed the illustrated, Japanified collection of scripture and opened his laptop, deciding he would pursue some of the social media reports he leaked. He smiled as he looked at the number of viewers on each. He was seated at a desk, and it was cold, so he put his hands under his backside briefly to warm them, and felt something in his pocket. He realized the pants he was wearing were the same he wore in Russia, because in his back pocket was the flash drive. He entirely forgot about it. Hadn't it gone through the wash? Would the drive still work? He was so curious, he forgot to disconnect from the internet when he plugged it in. A digital domino effect began at that moment, precisely as another came to its conclusion in North Korea. It started with Kaido's computer totally crashing, much to his chagrin. The dear leader deactivated all computer equipment pertaining to Miru, but the creature still came to him, ever demanding, ever smiling, ever rhyming, but only actually capable of so much mischief. It would leave him be several days after each intrusion, but if no progress were made on the QAI's demands, it assailed him with the full brunt of its abilities. The dear leader lost sleep, lost patience, and took it out on his people. Eventually he couldn't resist, and reactivated Miru's hardware. The QAI immediately demanded sacrifice in the form of humans for bioserver purposes. That's when the dear leader remembered Jurai, the only one who ever successfully infiltrated the Christian traders who slunk around underground playing subversive games. His promotion through ranks meant his direct contacts were no longer active. But secondary infiltrators would be able to find out information, and they could follow Jurai's old habits. However, that itself was a bit of an adventure. There were numerous disappearances of late, and they seemed to be getting out through some hitherto unknown northern passage. Many key figures in the underground Christian movement were gone, and it took a considerable amount of backtracking to find one still operating in the country, still clocking in, still accounted for, and known to be one of the top figures of the religious traitors. In his way, the dear leader was able to find Insu. He had just issued an order for Insu to be brought to Pyongyang when he was notified of anomalous activity on Mount Pektu. Some maniac appeared in an armored truck and disappeared into what was described as a rift in space and time to another dimension. Immediately after this news, Miru assailed him, compelling him to fill his server bays with bioservers. The dear leader threw in a clutch of political enemies already under interrogation until only one light didn't glow. With each person plugged into the machine, hidden noise increased in frequency. It wasn't exactly a hum, but it did somehow extend to any who could hear, making everyone rush and yell. Even the dear leader couldn't keep his leg from tapping out a rhythm constantly and to no purpose. The whole operation took several hours. By then, the helicopter arrived with Insu. When Ricky and Ethan came out on the other side of Mount Pektu, they were in for a rude awakening. The pearl in the center of the chamber no longer moved. There was no river of peroxide. "But that's impossible," Ricky said. Ethan warily looked around and had out a sonic gun. They kept many of these guns back at Calm headquarters, secured from the beings of that liminal world. He said, "It's going to be like old times in here soon. When they notice us, no cap, Ricky, we're not going to be getting another shot at this." Ethan looked at him, then at the ground, then off to either side of the great chamber where they could see yawning caverns extending deep into demon infrastructure. "I only have one idea and I don't like it at all." "Well?" He brought a hand to his forehead and crouched down in the spongy, wet-looking turf beyond the spherical human bioserver array. In North Korea, they brought this kind of plugging people into a collective consciousness model to QAI. They made people the qubits. But when they plugged some people in, it crashed the system. What kind of people? People with the Spirit of God in them. Ethan stood and looked at Ricky, who took a second to understand. Before he could say anything, Ethan continued. I was in one of those cylinders. I remember what happened. Soon I saw God. I woke up. Their system had a lockout. What are you getting at? They wouldn't dare plug somebody already converted in. You're saying we should know. I'm saying I should. I've done it. Is it safe? Ethan sighed. No, I don't think so. That might just be too risky. Like you said, it'll be hard to get another shot at this, fam. What's the way in? Ethan looked up and around, squinting. There, see? Oh, yes, I remember now. They ran, pint-sized ants across a white and pink space like a monstrous orchid's petals with a pearl in its center. At the periphery were old cylinders, strange circular things with spindly legs and other structures, most notably the remains of the cylinder terminus attacked, it becoming discs and coming there for whatever reason. These discs slowly drifted inward to the center of the biostructure, dissipating as they did, perhaps being digested. Perhaps it was an issue of the life cycle such pill-shaped conveyances had. Maybe this was how they were born. Maybe this was how they were repaired. Ethan didn't know. They looked like teeth in the distance. Each cylinder was composed of multiple discs. Each disc had 5 rooms around a central space, punched through by stairs throughout the vessel. Some discs remained external to the pearl in the center of these organic structures. Ethan didn't know why. Ricky didn't know why. It didn't matter. What mattered was, whatever sort of infrastructure defined them, it retained functionality. They made it to the discs and found inside one a slab with a withered corpse on it and varying cables sticking into various extremities. The slab was a little over knee height and came out of the wall inward from the disc. Ethan looked at Ricky. Ricky said, Are you sure about this? No. Should we pray? Yeah. And they did. Immediately after, there was a whirring sound. A light, a low blue glowing light, came on atop the slab. Ethan exhaled. All right. Remember, don't touch the walls while I'm gone. Didn't intend to. I remember last time. Yeah. Ethan got onto the slab, and the infrastructure of the evil technology leapt upon him, snaking something down his throat, inserting things elsewhere, and manifesting some sort of white covering that looked like Swiss cheese, cocooning him to the neck until, like a pebble falling into a canyon from a bridge over sky, Ethan saw Ricky sucked away to a point of light, and then nothing. You won't bow to me? Asked the dear leader. Insu said, There is only one that any man should bow before. But I can kill you. I assume that is why you brought me here. Did you? Said the dear leader, and turned facing the one empty stall of the server array. The next thing he said was this. Do you know where those who follow your Christ go into? You work them to death, or you play games torturing them until the same outcome develops. We certainly did. The dear leader nodded and turned. God, uncuff him. Leave us. But, dear leader, I said uncuff him and leave him to me. Yes, dear leader. They bowed low, did as they were told, and disappeared fast as they were able. Though in his 70s, and apparently frail, Insu drew from an inner strength attainable by no earthly means. He neither shook nor trembled. He felt like he were resting on something, like he wasn't the one in his body at that moment. It was a feeling like he knew when he stumbled into what is called deja vu. Like everything was happening as it was supposed to happen, and as he could expect it would happen, and as it had happened before. Deja vu. a checkpoint in the race of life. Insu said, "Thank you for uncuffing me." "So, do you know what we do to people like you, Insu?" "I'm sure you'll show me." "Nothing!" And the dear leader waited. "I'm not sure I understand." "Absolutely nothing, Insu. Because you people, you funny little Jesus people, do you know what you do? You work harder than anybody else in my kingdom. Yes, it's a kingdom. We can speak freely. And you people do your work more competently and more honestly. And you take up other slack. And when we kill you, do you know what happens? Why, more converts, of course. More of you traitorous little roaches, breeding like mad and becoming worse and worse with extermination. Now you'd think this might just be good for me, no? There could be a silver lining. More competent Jesus people running about pretending that digging in shit is God's work. But no, your belief is toxic in my military, and my men become soft. Oh, they're competent, all right. But they are sneak dissidents over borders and out of interrogation rooms. And if they're punished, hidden pharaohs of their ilk in the ranks only aspire to out-martyr them. And that ensue. That will be the undoing of this country, my family's legacy, and the dream of Marx. So you see, we have a problem. But and however, there is a solution. Do you know how we solve this issue, Insu? How could I? We send you lot to South Korea as defectors, and you check in every now and again over the phone. And you had better defect, or they will interrogate you dead in the South as a spy. You're going to get a little pamphlet with instructions for phone protocol. We take those voice messages and we reconfigure them and we send them to family here. And they think you're alive and dying horribly in a concentration camp, which you would be, except if you actually die, we make the problem worse in the conversion after. Because you're never alone, you people. There are always 1,000 more of you than anyone realizes. And you all seem to know what's going on. And that, Insu, is what you can expect if you survive this. Oh yes, you may die, but not from my hand. Today, my dear friend, I need the strongest of your kind. And I know that is you, because there are so few of you we've been able to lay hands on, because you're leaving this land like rats from a ship, and I don't even know where your exit vectors are. I'm sure you do still. I'm sure you can see how fewer of you to corrupt my people is not so much a problem for me. The rats you preside over can continue their exodus into. You are serving my purpose. And that also is a reason I will not kill you by my own hand today. You have in your way done me a solid favor, and I can't say the computer will be so kind. So now, you will get in one of these booths and pray to your funky Jesus as hard as you can to end this computer. Because if you don't, this damn computer will kill us all. As if on cue, there was a great mechanical shudder and an ear-piercing squeal. Ethan had gone under and was in the machine on the other side of reality. Insu and the dear leader had no idea. All they knew was the shriek of the computer. The dear leader misinterpreted this. "Get in the tube!" he hollered. Insu prayed aloud and did as he was told. In moments, the dear leader, amidst the screeching, called his technicians in, who supervised the connection, and in moments Insu saw the world sucked away to a pinprick of light until it disappeared. The old man delayed leaving through Sneg's tunnel. He let others go ahead of him to safeguard its secret until as many as could be exfiltrated were. He put himself last. But now the state had him. Was this his reward? Equipment of the facility began to quake, and the dear leader unloaded an entire clip into an impotent control panel under a wide monitor. Sekia!